So yesterday we heard a bit about the difference between constraints and trust, their advantages and disadvantages. But if you decide you want to implement some sort of constraint, you might not even be able to, because we can only get computers to enforce policies that we can unambiguously express in code. So some cases it's fine. So we can say, if you know this password, you can access this file. Or if you've got some sort of control system, you can say if there is overheating within this criteria, you must then shut down the reactor. But not that many policies can actually be expressed using this sort of language. If we look at surveillance law in the UK, it roughly says that data must be disclosed if and only if it is necessary and proportionate to do so. But what is necessary, what is proportionate, it depends on the interpretation of the situation and the sorts of context that computers are nowhere near able to understand at the moment. So one way to deal with this is to just say, we will trust people to act in an appropriate way. We assume that they're trustworthy. Maybe we'll check that these people are properly qualified, but that won't always work, and it certainly has problems in scaling. So we can still use computers, but not so much as enforcing constraints, but to enforce transparency. They can enforce that actions are going to be visible and actions cannot be tampered with after the fact. So if there is a failure, it at least can be identified from some sort of audit logs. This can be challenging, particularly in cases where the audit log is sensitive itself. Suppose we have a record of who's being surveilled by which agency and for what reason. That's not something you can just put out on the web. One of the papers that I mentioned on the SHB program is VAMS, and that tries to address this problem by allowing audits of statistics about this data while not actually disclosing the underlying data. But even then, if you have a technology like this, that doesn't mean that everything is okay. Transparency doesn't necessarily imply that individuals have agency to prevent these failures and to obtain redress. We've also seen this in the US with the actions of the police being filmed, and even then, it's actually very hard to hold police officers to account when they have been demonstrated to be breaking the acceptable rules. We can use transparency enhancing systems to produce evidence. How do you actually develop the agency to turn verifiable data into fair outcomes? Well, we've got the legal system, and it's imperfect, but it's what we normally use to turn evidence into justice. It's particularly problematic where evidence comes from computers. And one case where this has been very prominent in the UK is about the post office trial. Now, the UK post office don't just deliver letters, they also handle banking and gambling and all sorts of interactions with the government. A lot of money flows through these post office branches, and the computer system that coordinates this is called Horizon. And Horizon was showing that money had gone missing, and it turns out over 900 people who are running these branches, sub-postmasters, were convicted, and many of them went to jail, all on the basis of what Horizon said. It took decades to actually get this to a proper examination, and then it turned out that Horizon was riddled with bugs. The conclusion of the investigation was that it was not remotely robust, and this could probably be the largest miscarriage of justice in the UK. It's still ongoing. One of the reasons this happened is that the English legal system presumes that computers are reliable unless shown otherwise, and that showing otherwise is really quite hard. One reason this presumption exists is because building high assurance computer systems is very expensive and very hard. If you think about something like a space shuttle control system, actually building systems to produce good evidence is a bit easier. I'm calling these evidence critical systems, and one major distinction is it's okay if they just fail to produce a response, as long as it's not wrong, because the system can be shut down and recovered from. And it's also okay if a wrong answer is produced, but it can be detected after the fact. Neither of those are permitted in safety critical systems. So if we decide that evidence critical systems are a good thing to produce, how do we actually produce them? What are the right technologies and design principles to use? How do we evaluate them? Specifically, if we're looking at what Bayes' law tells us, we need to know the likelihood of an undetected failure in order to assess the likelihood that a failure has occurred. And then also, how do we encourage organizations like the post office to build these systems when they're going to be a bit more expensive, and also they might actually find against the operator of that computer system in favor of the users of that computer system. Okay, thank you.